everybody, Ethan here, back with another video. I know it's been a very long time since anything has been uploaded to the channel, but we're going to try and get back into making videos here very shortly, and this is the one that I wanted to jump into next. Now, you can see I have 4 laptops on this table. This is actually not a review of any of these, and I will be having some reviews of some of them later. I'll get into that shortly, but this is actually going to be talking about both all of these, including the MacBook that we have here, and my experience with many other laptops of recent. So I actually honestly just wanted to make a video about this because of how deeply frustrated I am with Microsoft and the way that Windows on mobile has been. So I thought it was a good time to go ahead and chat about this a little bit and talk about my experience, because I've had so many laptops over the last 4-ish years, most of which I've returned due to various issues, and I'm starting to realize that getting a good, solid, stable Windows laptop is practically impossible at this point. And this is coming from somebody that I would put myself close to what I would consider a high expert on Windows. I'm not going to say that I'm, the best of the best, but definitely have a lot of experience with it at an enterprise level and at a consumer level, and I'm just deeply frustrated, basically. So to put it short, before I jump into some of the crazy problems I've had and stuff like that I figure are worth talking about, because Microsoft needs to do some work to fix these issues, it's worth noting that for a lot of the stuff I do, I need Windows. So Linux and Mac OS are not necessarily an option for me in comparison to Windows. I have to use Windows. I'm not going to get into a lot of that. Maybe I'll make another video about that at some point. But for some of my workflows and some of the things I do, Windows is a requirement. That being said, I am so deeply irritated with how Windows on laptops has been that I am actually considering a MacBook Pro as my next possible device, and dealing with the downsides and the things that I need that don't really work on there, and figuring out other workarounds for that, whether it's remotely connecting to one of my servers and using Windows on a server or something like that. I also think it's important to emphasize that Windows on the desktop has not been the same experience. Windows on the desktop has its classic little bugs. Explorer crashes sometimes, weird other issues, but it's mostly been relatively okay. I'm just convinced that Microsoft does not know what they're doing to actually make like laptops. The OS is just not good from a laptop perspective. It's not laptop first at all. And then I will talk a little bit about my experience with Mac OS, which I've used before and have been using for a while, and I'm actually probably getting rid of this little MacBook Air here shortly, just because it's not what I need. But anyway, the first I want to jump into is really kind of universal problems that I've experienced across all of Windows machines, and this comes from both managing a fleet of Windows machines as well as all my own personal ones and friends and family and stuff like that I've helped with, because there's some bugs on laptop, like Windows for laptops, mostly around sleep states and stuff like that, a modern standby, which has been talked about before, that just make it a horrible experience. So the main one that I've experienced that's so frustrating, that many other people have had, is both laptops going into modern standby when you put them to sleep, and then they stay connected, and then they overheat in your backpack. That's a common one. That happens a lot. They get really hot, your fans are blasting, your battery's dead like a few hours later. It's awful. It's like you never turned the laptop off. That's happened to everybody. Microsoft seems to refuse to fix that. I mean, that's been talked about Linus Tech Tips. Other channels have talked about that for ages, and it just seems like there's nothing that they're going to do about that. The other one that I've experienced also involves sleep, where I've had all of my Windows machines, other than one, which I'll get to a little bit later, do this. Where you'll put them to sleep, and after a certain amount of time in sleep, modern standby, they will go into hibernate so that they can save more battery. That is a normal thing. It's lame because, right, you can leave a Mac sitting for a week and open it up and it's on instantly. Everything that you had on there is still connected. Your messages are all updated on it, etc. But with Windows, especially x86, machines, they need to go into hibernation in order to actually save power. And what I've had happen on almost 100% is when they go into that hibernate state, there is a chance, probably around 10% chance, that they just crash and then they reboot and then they go back into sleep and eventually back into hibernate. I validated this by going through Microsoft sleep studies, which you can pull from your machine to see the actual sleep states that it went through and what triggered those sleep states. And you can see where it crashes. Event log confirms where it crashes, and you can see that it then reboots, goes back into normal, goes back into sleep, and then goes back into hibernate and is fine after that. And what most users will report this as is, I put my laptop to sleep and the next day everything was closed. Because to them, since it's rebooted and then gone back to hibernate, it doesn't look like it's fresh starting. It looks like it was asleep, but everything closed for some reason. But that's not what's happening. It's actually crashing. So a lot of fun with that. So those are some like universal problems along with a lot of the smaller bugs that Windows has had for ages that I'm not really going to get into. File Explorer freezing, taskbar freezing, Windows snap locations not going where they need to, or you snap a window and then it unsnaps like slightly by a few pixels later for no reason at all. Sometimes it's triggered by putting it to sleep, but sometimes it just happens. Not going to get into a bunch of detail on that. But I do want to jump into some of the specific problems I've had with some of the hardware and drivers as well. So these aren't just 100%, although I think a lot of this is still Microsoft to blame. There is some blame to the hardware manufacturers, both the systems themselves and also the components that go into the systems, AMD, Intel, etc. And then also driver issues related to the software stack, and then sometimes the manufacturer's own software and drivers that have issues. Now, for reference, I've had a lot of laptops over the last 4 years, again, mostly because I've been trying to get one that's stable and they've all had issues. I'll jump into this guy first because this one I'm actually going to be doing a kind of re-review. Well, I say re-review, I've never reviewed it, but it's quite old now. This is over 3 years old, this machine. But this machine here is a pretty special machine that I'm going to be doing a full video on, so keep an eye out for that because this is, as far as I'm concerned, the last true desktop replacement laptop in existence. They, as far as I'm concerned, don't really make them anymore. There's a classification there. Desktop replacement means something. It doesn't just mean big laptop. But this machine here, you can see it's a monster. And the reason it's a monster is because this actually has a desktop 11700K in it. So it's a socketed CPU in there running, it's a desktop system. And the reason I wanted to talk about this one first in specific is because this machine here has been the most stable of any of the laptops I've had. And it coincidentally uses mostly desktop componentry inside. So you've got an 11700K in there, it has 128 gigs of RAM, and it has an RTX 3080. Now, it's a laptop 3080 because NVIDIA won't let laptop manufacturers put desktop chips in laptops anymore. That'll be in the full video of this when that happens, a better explanation for that. Now, this has been the most stable. It still has crashed while asleep sometimes, and it still does go into hibernate after a certain amount of time, but it doesn't run modern standby the same way, so it's not trying to stay connected and stuff, so it has been far more reliable. And I think that's really funny that the one that has desktop parts has been more reliable. I find that kind of interesting. So this has been the most stable, but now I'm going to jump into some of the other issues that I've had with these other machines because I'm starting to get to the point where I want to review laptops more, but I feel like most reviewers aren't using these machines as their daily, everyday machine that they've got to use for work or other stuff like that, whereas that's the perspective I'm coming from. And so most of the reviews of, well, the reviews of any machine I buy are reviews that people are very happy with them. And then you get them and you use them and it's like, oh, well, they benchmarked them, etc., but they didn't actually like, oh, this is my laptop for a few weeks. So they didn't come across any of the annoying issues that I'll get into in a second on these. And I think it's important to cover that because I actually think it's borderline impossible to get an actually stable Windows laptop now. Maybe the Microsoft Surfaces. I have not actually personally used one as a personal device. I've managed some of those in a fleet and they've been pretty good. Before I get into all the problems with these though, I'm going to jump into the one brand that I've had the least problems with, which is very interesting, and that is Framework. I have had a Framework laptop. I also manage a fleet of Framework laptops. It's what I've chosen for one of the places that I do work for, and they've been remarkably stable, actually. It still had some issues. There were issues there, and like battery life's not as good, performance is not as good. Like there's certainly downsides to Framework, don't get me wrong. But I think it's worth noting that if you're looking for stability, that's probably what I recommend right now. However, that's specifically the Framework 13-inch laptop, which is more of an ultrabook and not a gaming machine by any means. Their 16-inch machine, and you can find more info about this online, has had a plethora of problems, including issues with its liquid metal and other stuff like that. That's a different story. I probably wouldn't recommend that for the time being. They'll probably end up fixing that. But in terms of stability, the Framework has been remarkably stable. Now, I'm going to jump into my newest machine actually first because I think it's worth talking about. This is a Zephyrus G16. It's brand new. It's running the Ryzen HX 300 series chips, and it's been a phenomenal overall machine. Like it's powerful, it's light, it's all metal. Like it's as close to a MacBook as I've ever experienced in a Windows machine. It really is quite nice. It's beefy. The speakers are the best on a Windows laptop I've ever heard, except maybe this guy, but that's not really fair. Look at the size of it. However, I've only had this for about 3 days, and I've already had a huge number of problems with it. And some are fixable, but some are not. The first I'm going to get into is the sleep issues. So this has had the same sleep issues that I've talked about where it crashes while asleep sometimes, especially when it tries to go into hibernate, it'll crash and then it'll never wake up. But this has actually had additional sleep problems that partially may be related to the Armoury Crate software or ASUS's horrible drivers, or potentially, again, more Microsoft issues. It's really hard to be 100% sure on these without doing a deep dive. But basically, if I close the lid on this and I have it set to go to sleep when I close the lid, if the fans are off, the fans will turn on and they will never turn off. Sometimes rebooting solves it for a few times and then it starts happening again. A lot of other people that have run ASUS machines have had the same problem with their ASUS machines. So it's not uncommon. It's been going on for 3 years as far as I can tell, and there's just never been a good fix for it. And the answer is always, oh, hibernate your machine, which, like, yeah, you can kind of get by hibernating, but it's extremely annoying to have to hibernate your laptop all the time, right? Like, what if you want to just close it and walk upstairs and open it? Well, no, you need to keep it open now, otherwise you're going to be waiting 20 seconds for it to wake from hibernate, which is just completely ridiculous. The other issue with sleep is sometimes it will just not wake from sleep at all. It hasn't crashed, it just won't wake, and I have to hold the power button and kill it and restart it. And then also the keyboard backlight sometimes will just not turn on after waking from sleep, and a reboot is the only solution, or sometimes putting it to sleep and waking it back up will fix that again. So far with Hibernate, none of that's been an issue, but I've had other issues with, like, my secondary M.2 that I installed in this just not being allowed to write anymore after waking from Hibernate. I'm hoping that was a one-off. I haven't done enough A/B testing to know for sure yet, but I couldn't do anything with that SSD until I rebooted again, which was just ridiculous. So all kinds of problems like that. And that kind of touches on, I think, some of the issues are also related to AMD and Intel and other vendors, and I have a better one coming up that'll give a better example of those issues. But this is an expensive machine. This is about $2,000. It's pretty ridiculous that it's going to have these issues, and all the reviews of this thing are phenomenal. And I've already done a lot of troubleshooting. Like, the drivers are all updated directly from AMD. I'm not just using the ASUS drivers. And from what I understand, the only real fix is uninstalling Armory Crate, and there's an open source project called GHelper that sometimes does a better job. I have not tested that yet, but obviously a brand new machine, I shouldn't have to troubleshoot a whole bunch of problems, and I shouldn't even have to install drivers beyond what Windows Update installs in order for it to have a functional, stable experience. I'm not talking like, oh, the best performance or whatever, right? But just like the drivers delivered through Windows Update should be good enough to get me up and running. So it's ridiculous to even have to do any of that. And then to top it off, it's still having issues that I thought I solved but didn't solve. Another example of that is anything that was GPU accelerated that was using the integrated graphics, so you're browsing Chrome or whatever like that, would randomly stop rendering frames. The mouse would still move, and anything that's not GPU accelerated would work, but the like Chrome, for example, would drop frames. So you'd be typing and all of a sudden nothing would be happening, and then everything you typed would appear instantly. It's not lag typing. It's not like, oh, and then it would type out what you typed. It would appear instantly. It was not rendering those frames. I installed the AMD driver updates directly from AMD. That seems to have fixed it. Sounds like a corrupt driver, not even just a bad driver, and that's another example of, like, okay, wow. Now, the one thing I haven't tried to troubleshoot on this yet, because I've only had it a few days, is a completely fresh Windows install. Shouldn't have to do that. I might do that and see if some of these issues disappear magically, but it's just completely ridiculous in my mind. Anyway, that's been the Zephyrus G16. I will have a full review of this, assuming I don't just return it. We'll see if it continues to have problems. I may just return it. I haven't tried it on, like, Thunderbolt docks and stuff yet, which is critical for my workflow. So we'll see. Oh, great piece of hardware. I hope I can keep this because this fits all of my needs. But like I said, I'm starting to get pushed into potentially buying a MacBook, even though I don't really want to do that because macOS doesn't work as well for what I'm doing. Dell XPS here has had an issue that Dell's units have had for about 8 years. They have an embedded controller that manages the power delivery to the system that will slowly die over time. It doesn't happen to 100% of laptops, or maybe it would be 100%, but most are gotten rid of, or other things are dead by the time they wear out. Dell has never fixed it. Again, it's been a problem for 8 years on most Dell machines have this same embedded controller. It might be actually all, it might be 100% of them. And what will happen is if you are not using the stock charger, then it will limit the CPU to less than half a gigahertz. It's about a 3-watt power limit that is put on the CPU because that embedded controller is dying and doesn't understand the charge level that's coming into the laptop and puts it into kind of a safety mode. And the problem with that is then the system is so slow it's literally unusable. Like, you can't even type when your CPU is running that low, and other componentry is power limited as well. So it's completely ridiculous. So this is dead. The only fix for that is a mainboard fix. Now you might be saying, well, just use the power adapter that came with it. Well, first, I would argue that that's extremely lame when it's a laptop that's got lots of Thunderbolt ports that's designed to be docked, and when it's docked, you're almost never using 130 watts, so an 80-watt dock should be just fine. And it also worked fine for about a year and a half. So this is about 2 years old now. Last 6 months, it's just not been working right. But that issue will also sometimes happen on battery, where it will get stuck in this less than half a gigahertz power envelope. Like I said, it's like a 3-watt power envelope for the CPU on battery, and the only fix is to sleep it and wake it again or restart it. But if it's gone into hibernate, and restarting it doesn't always fix it, by the way, sometimes it's multiple restarts. But if it's gone into hibernate, then you have to wait for it to wake from hibernate, which takes approximately 2 full minutes because the CPU is power limited. So this is just a brick now. The only fix for it, again, is a new main board, which is a $500 repair and completely ridiculous. So that's another problem. That's a hardware issue. And I'm getting to a point here, I promise. So one of my more recent things that I've had is my HP OmniBook Ultra Flip that I bought, which is running Intel's new Lunar Lake chips. And that was a 265V, I think, was the chip that I had in that. I can't remember. Their naming is still bad. But anyway, that's an OLED laptop. It's a little 14-inch. It flips over. It's a 2-in-1, all that. Fantastic piece of hardware. I was actually very, very impressed with the hardware. It was also very capable of gaming for something so small and thin and light. Obviously nothing like these, but it gamed not much worse than this with its 3050 Ti, surprisingly. It was a really pretty playable experience in a lot of stuff. Very impressed with it. I desperately wanted to keep that laptop. However, and I think these are mostly Intel issues this time, although it did have the same Windows bugs of crashing while it was going into hibernate and stuff. It had some BSOD loops that happened with certain peripherals plugged into it. That maybe was fixed with some driver changes. However, the bigger problems were that it had horrible issues connecting to Thunderbolt docks. So you would connect it and sometimes it would just disconnect. And we're talking like a dozen times a day, not like a reasonable, like, oh, once a day you have to unplug and plug it back in. So it would disconnect over and over and over, which made it nearly unusable. And sometimes it wouldn't even reconnect without a reboot if you unplugged and plugged the Thunderbolt dock back in. So that was completely unusable and ridiculous. It interrupted meetings and stuff for me that I had to participate in. But then also the other issue with meetings is the Bluetooth audio on that device, which is, I believe on that one, it might be integrated into the Lunar Lake SoC. I can't remember. I could be misquoting that. I apologize if I am. But either way, it's an Intel Wi-Fi card and Bluetooth card, so it should be very stable versus like the MediaTek that this one's running, which has been stable. So very interesting flip of things there. But it was, the Bluetooth would disconnect. And it actually got so bad that more than one time, the entire PCIe device would disappear from the system of the Bluetooth and Wi-Fi card. So then it just had no connectivity. And then you had to reboot the machine and it would come back. It was ridiculous. Bluetooth devices would disconnect, one ear would disconnect and the other wouldn't. There'd be an echo because they wouldn't be in sync correctly. Just a horrible overall experience. I also had two Razer Blade 14s, both of which had Bluetooth, sorry, not Bluetooth, USB-C problems. One of the USB-C ports just would not work at all. And then the other one of the USB-C ports would not run higher than USB 2.0 speeds. The DisplayPort alt mode still worked on it, but if you wanted to dock with that port, you were screwed. So that was an awful experience. I also had a Asus Zephyrus G14. So that was before they went all metal MacBook-like. That was when they had the plastic ones and they were a little bit better of a deal, quite a bit better of a deal, very good deal. I loved the Zephyrus G14. It performed very well. It had a few minor hardware issues. The keyboard wasn't that great. The speakers vibrated, if you watch reviews of that, you know what I'm talking about. But it also had horrible issues with sleep. The fans would turn on in sleep. Things wouldn't work correctly with some docks, and so I had to give up on that. It was another one that I wanted to keep, but could not keep because of issues, which is just ridiculous. And all of these have been returned as defective because they were just useless, and including all of the Razer Blades. I also had a Razer Blade 16 with a 4090, like we're talking a top spec one. I was very excited for it. I was like, you know what, I'm gonna do it and not buy another machine for like half a decade, right? So I purchased that, and the trackpad did not work, which was awful. Like I had all kinds of issues. It was a widespread issue at launch. Seems like they fixed it about a month after it came out, but I wasn't going to risk, having a non-functional trackpad and having to deal with a warranty claim, so I just returned it. Another example of a completely ridiculous situation. I also had a Dell XPS 13 2-in-1. We're talking the one that would flip all the way over with the OLED touch display. That one was a little bit closer to stable, but it had some issues with the display where the display would randomly start flashing colors and stuff like that if you were watching HDR content. Disabling HDR fixed it, but it was supposed to be an HDR capable display. So another example of all of these examples that I've given so far are these tiny things that maybe there are workarounds for, and some of them are more major things, of course, but the ones that are tiny things, there are workarounds for them. But those workarounds are completely ridiculous. You shouldn't have to worry about that. Like, it's just like, I shouldn't be having to be like, oh, I'm going to put this in hibernate. Everybody just put it in hibernate. That'll fix your issues. You won't have any of these problems anymore. And I'm like, okay, That's not a solution. My $2,000 laptop should be able to go into sleep mode. So it's just lame. Like, it doesn't make any sense. The crux of all of this is that these hardware vendors, AMD and Intel, I don't say Nvidia because it seems to be mostly a CPU side thing and the main chipsets more than the video drivers. But AMD and Intel, all the laptop manufacturers, and Microsoft need to do better. They need to fix this because somebody like me, who is a very tech savvy person, I am very, very familiar with Windows and familiar with deep troubleshooting. And I reinstalled Windows Fresh 2 different times on that HP OmniBook that I had. I did enormous amounts of troubleshooting, digging through Windows logs, doing sleep studies, everything, trying to figure out if there was anything that I could do to fix this. Reinstall all the drivers scratch, reinstall the drivers directly from the manufacturer, reinstall the drivers from Intel and AMD directly instead, right? To see if maybe the drivers that are newer from those manufacturers work better than from the actual laptop manufacturers. Everything I can think of under the sun to fix these issues. And nothing worked. And this gets to my point. I'm not a normal consumer. And a normal consumer wouldn't know to do all of the troubleshooting steps that I do. They wouldn't be reinstalling Windows on their own. Um, it's unfair. They shouldn't have to deal with any of these issues. It just seems like a defective machine. And I also think some of normal users disliking computers and saying computers never work right and the gremlins and stuff like that, I think some of that comes down to Windows has just been so bad for so long that people assume that this is the way it is, that issues like this happen. And it shouldn't be that way. It doesn't need to be that way. They could be doing better, but Microsoft is too invested in pretending that AI is a big deal for them, and AI is a big deal, but they're too busy pretending that it's a bigger deal than it is, and they're too busy pretending as a company so that they can make their stock price go up, instead of working on the issues that even enormous content creators have been complaining about for a decade now. And this is the reason that you see so many videos. There's so many people that are like, I switched to Mac OS and I'm not going back. And it actually saddens me a little bit because I genuinely like Windows as a platform. I think that it is better than Mac OS as a platform. I think that it is easier to use. I think that it has better native features, better features overall, stuff that you can do on it that you just can't do on Mac. And I think it's just a more intuitive user interface in my experience. Like, I just like it better. And this isn't just years of experience. There's a lot I really like about Mac OS. But I think Windows is objectively a better OS if it wasn't an unstable, buggy privacy nightmare. And that's where it really frustrates me, that we could have something that's competitive. But the reason that Windows laptops still sell so well is because there's a lot of cheap ones and because businesses still need them. And that's slowly kind of changing on the latter part, because we're starting to get more and more management features that we can use on Mac OS. We can adopt them to Microsoft Intune and stuff like that. But for now, it's still very much so. You need Windows if you're a business in many, many, many cases. And it's very frustrating to me. And I think we just, we need these companies to do better. And part of me wonders if the competition that the laptop manufacturers on the Windows side, including AMD and Intel as well, the component manufacturers, the competition, the thing that they're trying to compete with is macOS and ARM. I sometimes feel like there's been this compromise to rush to get things out, and also things are getting so much more complicated that it's difficult for them to make a stable experience. And I think they're trying to compete, and by trying to compete as hard as they are, we're running into these really, really bad issues that we shouldn't have to deal with in the first place. And I would far rather have a slightly larger, thicker laptop that has slightly worse battery life that doesn't have all of these issues. Which is why I stuck with this for so long, but it's getting ridiculous to carry around something. I mean, this weighs like 11 pounds. Like, it's ridiculous. So this is an extreme example, but that's why I kept this one as long as I did and kept going back to it after buying all of these machines and then returning most of them, is because this was the only one that remained stable. And I think it's just, again, really interesting that my desktop has also been surprisingly stable compared to what I've had to deal with around these Windows machines, which tells me that it's mostly around shrinking of components and power efficiency, where Windows is just such a terrible experience. Getting pretty long on the video here, and I understand that, so appreciate anybody that has stuck around for this. And if you have had an actually stable Windows laptop experience, I would love to hear about it because, again, it's been remarkably bad. Now, I've been using macOS for a little while as well, for a while, over a year now, but I've been using macOS more and more over time. And I completely get now why so many people are moving to macOS. And you hear a lot of people that work in IT and stuff, and I mean any facet of IT. So I mean, like, what I do is systems administration, network engineering, and infosec. But you also have people that work in programming and other stuff like that, that are be like, I'm switching to Mac. Like, I've used Mac or I'm switching to Mac. And I'm starting to understand so much more why that is the case. And it really comes down to stability and reliability. macOS has been phenomenal. I can leave this machine sitting asleep for multiple days, and I wake it back up, and all my messages on my messaging platforms are there. I don't have to wait for them to show up. They are there because it's been on and connected to the internet the entire time, just keeping everything running in the background. No problems. The efficiency is ridiculous. The reliability and the stability, I cannot talk enough about how great it has been to have a machine that I know will just work. I've been keeping a log of bugs that I've experienced on Windows that's like 60 entries long at this point. And I guess I have more to add to it now. And I've also been keeping another log of bugs that I've experienced on macOS as part of a kind of longer term comparison of, like, is it really that much more stable, or does it have issues and people just think it's more stable? And no, it is more stable. I have had a single bug on this machine. Just one. It was a very minor visual bug that I'm not going to take the time to explain, but it was one minor visual bug that was easy to fix, and then it was fine after that. Everything else has been rock solid stable. It has worked perfectly. It has not hitched. It has not crashed. It has not done anything wrong. Everything's just worked. And this is really, I think, comes down to why so many people are moving to macOS. Is it's not even the liking of macOS, because again, there's a lot I actually don't like about it as much. Topic for another video again. But it's just so much better at working. And when what I do for a living is troubleshoot desktops and servers and cloud infrastructure and other stuff like that, I need my laptop that's the one tool that I need to work correctly. And that's what's so frustrating, is I would rather have issues with my phone or any of my camera equipment or my servers or my desktop, anything else, just not my laptop. My laptop's the one thing I need to be perfectly stable, which is why I've tried to go through so many machines, and I've just never managed to get there. And I'm starting to get to the point where I really wanted to make this video because I genuinely don't think it's possible to get a completely stable Windows laptop. Now, maybe you can get one that is almost completely stable if you're just a person that browses the web. And if you're that person, that's great for you. I'm glad that you can install Chrome and it works well, and maybe the system crashes in sleep once in a while and it's not a big deal and you hardly notice it. But the amount of people that have had issues that aren't even doing much beyond Chrome, we're talking just word processing and stuff like that, maybe lots of Chrome and some Microsoft Teams apps or whatever, right? The amount of issues that they have is just mind-boggling. And this is from an end user perspective too. This isn't just from my perspective. And I hate having to tell people that, oh, that's just a bug with Windows. I'm sorry. Like, I'm sorry that everything you had open is gone when you put it to sleep sometimes. I can't fix that. There's no solution for that. That's a Microsoft problem. And they're probably not going to address it because we've been complaining about Modern Standby for, again, a decade. Anyway, I think that's pretty much it for this video here. I just really wanted to talk about my experience laptop shopping because I feel like I have a bit of a unique perspective with my experience and my skill around this, along with how many machines I've had in such a short period of time, that none of them have been stable except for the MacBook, which is just weird to me to say that, but it's gotten that bad. Windows didn't used to be that bad, but Windows is, in my opinion and objectively, getting worse over time, even if they're adding good features. Like we have GPU scheduling stuff that's in there now, right? Hardware accelerated GPU scheduling. That's great. Like, they're adding cool features like that, and it's still the best platform for gaming, but it's just remarkable how unstable it is for a normal kind of workflow. And this is why you see a lot of IT people switching to Mac and talking about, I just need something that works. And you always will get the people that argue, oh, well, Windows isn't that bad, blah, 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 blah. And like, the reality is they're probably not using it for the real work that a lot of us are having to do out there in the workforce. And I understand now why people that work in IT, well, I say now, this has been an issue for a very long time, but I think this video may help you understand why people that work in IT are like, no, I just need something that never has a problem so that I can get my work done and fix all the things that are having problems. Anyway, this has been another video. There is more to come soon. Getting back into this. The studio is kind of back up and running now. Obviously, a little cleanup to do. Use some boxes around, but we'll be making more videos here soon. So thank you everybody for watching, and I'll see you on the next one.